Hello, friends. Welcome back. This week, our guest is Declan Hammond. Declan, thanks so much for making time for us. How are you keeping?
Very welcome. Yeah, I'm very well and really looking forward to it. Slightly apprehensive about where we're going to go, but delighted to be here, Jim.
Well, I really appreciate you being open to this. We were kind of talking a little bit before about a bit of a synchronicity that we come together and record this conversation. Um, but I wanted to I wanted to have a conversation with you because I've recently kind of come across homeopathy,
Mm,
and I feel like it would be really useful to have a kind of open,
mm,
prolonged discussion in and around homeopathy, how it works, what it can help,
mm,
because I know that there are a lot of people out there that either are apprehensive about it and don't trust it at all,
mm,
or kind of, as we said before, they almost use it as a last ditch thing.
mm.
Um, and only because it's helped me and it's helped people that I know that I would love to share it in a kind of balanced way. But first and foremost, I would love to hear about a bit about yourself for the listeners
Mhm.
and kind of how you ended up playing such a big role in Irish homeopathy.
Mm. Long story.
I know it's.
I have. I think this story really started. I was thinking about this when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my dad got a bursting headache. And he was going around the house and you could see he was really in pain. And my mum said, there's anodyne in the cupboard. There's painkillers in the cupboard. You need to use it. And he looked at it. He said, well, why would I take a painkiller? If I have a head pain, there's something wrong. I need to find out what's wrong. I need to do something with healing myself. I need to fix whatever is wrong. And Declan, as a 7-year old, that caught his attention because I'd had pains and aches and stuff, and the idea that you would have a reason for a pain and ache never dawned on me. But that
Mm,
that was the seed for the work I did with homeopathy. Illness has a purpose. Illness is telling you something. When you have a headache, your body is saying something is out of balance, and it's out of balance in this particular realm here. And what about doing something about that? And that I thought was just a wonderful thing. And in my teenage years, I got very involved with teaching myself yoga and getting very interested in practices around health and very curious about diet. And, I got really interested in health. And so I kind of put my dad's thoughts behind and, as teenagers do, leaving my father very far behind. It was like everything he'd say, I'd have to do something different. And I found myself on a yogic path, and many of my teachers were, as they come in from the work they were doing in the community, they'd come in and they'd share that they had given this remedy and that remedy for people in public. And when I went to India, that became even a greater piece of work because so many of the teachers who I really respected in a big way, before they would come in for their evening meditations, they would have done the rounds of the local villages, and they would have given remedies to people who were sick and unwell, and basically like that was part of their spiritual practice, like doing their meditation and providing service. And I was very curious about, well, what is this homeopathy stuff? And they said, oh, it's a natural medicine. We don't have money in India for, the expensive Western chemical medicine. And anyway, that has lots of side effects. So what we really want to do is provide, medicine that we can afford to the people who can't afford medicine. That really landed in a deep way. And I, again, just filed that away because I didn't have any really need for the medicines themselves. I was too busy about learning about my own yogic practice on it. But homeopathy was there behind, just hanging on, saying, "Hey, remind me, remind me." And I was blessed in 1979 then by having the birth of twins. And the kids were born very, very prematurely, 27 weeks. and both of my kids were in hospital for ages, like 6 weeks in incubators and everything. And at the time, like, no child had survived at the weight of my daughter. She was less than 900 grams when she was born. So it was an extraordinary thing. So I really saw the best of conventional medicine at that. And it's by the grace of conventional medicine that my children are still alive, So it was just an extraordinary thing to do. But then they came out of hospital and came home. And within days of coming out of hospital, my daughter threw up a massive fever, and she was hallucinating. Her eyes were dilated. She was flailing around. She was delirious with it. And as a new parent, I was 24 years old, I was just freaked, absolutely freaked by it. But I had somehow in my mind that I need to make contact with any homeopath who may be in Dublin at the time. And there were two. And one of them happened to live about 10 minutes drive from our house, which was just one of those beautiful synchronicities that my life was full of. And this guy came to the house, and it was an old guy, Dr. Rice was his name, really old school homeopath. Took out a big kit and opened up and tipped powder into his bag, and then he took some liquid and put it into the powder and mixed it. And I was fascinated with this. It looked like some kind of very amazing old school alchemy, and he prepared it very carefully. And my daughter was still flailing around and was, total distress. He tipped the remedy into her mouth, just powder. And as soon as it landed in her tongue, she just went. And my first response was like, oh, what have you done? That you've done something terrible to my daughter. Like, she had gone from such an extreme level of distress into calm, and she was breathing deeply. Like, I thought, honestly, I thought he killed her. And I realized, okay, she's not dead. She's just breathing very, very slowly and very calmly. And it was almost instantaneously. And I thought, oh my God, this is homeopathy at its work. Homeopathy works with the principle like with like. My daughter was in a very intense state. So he prescribed a remedy that was designed for working with acute states in a strength that dealt with the intensity that she was in. And what did it do? Within a couple of seconds, she was calm and she was sleeping again. When she woke up, her eyes were back to normal, her fever had dropped, she was no longer delirious, and that all happened over the space of about 10 minutes. I said to the doc, I need to do this. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he said, well, he looked at me very, very compassionately, and he said, well, first of all, you have to become a doctor. And then you have to follow the road of becoming a medical doctor. And then if you can get through that, then you can go off and study homeopathy. You can do it as a postgraduate training. So you're not going to be able to go and study homeopathy. And anyone who knows me personally, the quickest way to get me to do something is to tell me not to do it. So he was just absolutely sure that I couldn't do it. So at the time, there was no way that I could study homeopathy outside of going to medical school. So I got books together, and then I moved to Denmark with my kids, and I found that there were a number of Indian homeopaths living in Denmark. So I got to apprentice myself with them and, sit in with them and watch them, how they worked. They gave me different books to read. So for a period really from about 7-8 years, I was self-taught. I experimented on everyone in my life. When somebody had a bad fall, or they had an intense fever, or some particular, health challenge, I was like, oh, great. I tried it out, and I had some great success. I was very, very pleased with it. And I learned about working with homeopathy in acute conditions, just the kind of normal things that having children in the family, coughs, colds, fevers, flus, falls, aches, breaks. wounds, all of these kind of things, the everyday kind of things that you'd go to a medical doctor with. My kids almost never saw a medical doctor. I was able to deal with all of these things, and I took them through all sorts of childhood illnesses. I took them through, as I said, breaks, falls, all sorts of different things. And so it was really, really empowering for me to be able to, as a parent, to be able to look after the health of my family. And that really, really just strengthened my desire to do this professionally. And it was only in 1986 when I found out that actually there was a school had just been started in the UK to train what they call professional homeopaths, like non-medical homeopaths. So I dived into it, and it was a part-time course. So I flew from Denmark to London over the first couple of years, and finally I got so deep into it that I decided I need to move to London and do it as a full-time course, so as a degree level course, and that took me up to 1990, and it was. Then I'd been going backwards and forwards to India. I'd been involved with a lot of different health projects in India, and I had been involved with helping to set them up and supporting them. And I would go to India to offer support, but also to learn about homeopathy in practice. And India is obviously a very different kind of environment. So we're dealing with illnesses like malaria and dysentery, and seeing, and I got dysentery myself a couple of times, and seeing again how remedies work, not on other people, but actually taking me out of delirium and my bowels turning to liquid, that I'd seen the remedies work. So I was really fired up with it. And so I'd been involved with, learning, helping people build up projects. And, I went from there to work in Bali, and we set up a project in Bali that was called Barefoot Doctor Training, which basically took people from all around Southeast Asia. They came to work. It was an NGO we were working with, and these people came to us, and we trained them, gave them a 6 months training in 6 days a week, training with homeopathy, clinic every evening. And people would come in from the villages, would have half cut their hand off with the sickle, or, come in with horrible illnesses. And, we did amazing work. It was quite simple, because what I realized that in the environments that we were working in India and the environments that we were working with in Bali, people didn't have any conventional medicine. They couldn't afford it. But often conventional medicine can be a barrier to people getting well because of the side effects and things. So we got great results because people were too poor to be able to get conventional medicine. So it was great. And the calling came back to come back to Ireland. I hadn't lived in Ireland at that stage for 22, 23 years. And I came back to Ireland, and I had heard that a homeopathic school had been started by a bunch of Dutch people, and I found myself back in the west of Ireland. And again, one of those coincidences, the first weekend I was there, I was invited to somebody's house who happened to be running the school in Dublin, which was, oh, wow. And so we clicked instantly, and they asked me to become a teacher in the school. Within a year, the Dutch guys were starting to pull out, and they asked me would I take over the school. So from 1993, I reset up the Irish School of Homeopathy, and it's still going strong today. I've kind of semi-retired from the school some years ago, but I ran it and was I was a co-founder and a director of the school for 22, 23 years, and we've trained probably about 600 homeopaths in the meantime. When I came to Ireland first, the first professional meeting of the Irish Society of Homeopaths, were 7 of us with cups of coffee around a table. We were the profession. Now we have literally hundreds of people, and it's a good piece of work. So I'm very, very pleased to see what we're doing and what we've done. Back in the early 90s, people would go, "Homie, what?" And would look askance as if I was talking about some kind of, something unusual.
Just psychedelic.
psychedelic or something sexual. People had this
Mm.
homeo, and
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
it was, it sounds ridiculous now from this perspective, but at the time people had literally no idea what it was. There were a handful of medical doctors, some of them quite old, who were practicing, and we were, I think, seven professional homeopaths, of which there's only two of us left standing, and we're still here and still doing work. And I still see patients these days. I'm working online, and since COVID, one of the gifts of COVID was I had a beautiful practice just south of Dublin, and people would come from all over to come to the practice. And now, every time I log on to my Zoom calls, yesterday I had 5 different time zones. So I
Wow.
had literally people around the globe. So the practice has developed from tiny amounts of people here in Ireland training lots of people to working with the practice on my own to now a global audience of patients. So that's
Mm.
been my homeopathic journey, and it's been a journey from the mid 70s to now, and I'm having the best fun of my life with it. I'm seeing homeopathy do things now, Jim, that I couldn't have even imagined 10 years ago, let
Wow.
alone 30, 40 years ago. It's like, as I've deepened in my understanding of myself and humanity and illness and health, as I've deepened into my understanding of those, I've been able to hold space and support people through greater and greater challenges over the years. And I feel blessed to be able to offer something that has provided healing and support for thousands of people, and continues. And I hope, God willing, that it'll continue for quite some time yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic work, Declan.
Mm.
It's really it's it's a real gift. There's a few things that I kind of wanted to pull off from
Mhm.
that answer. One was that I like the emphasis, and I've heard you say this before as well, that you're
Mhm.
not like fundamentalist, right? You're not saying that Western medicine is all terrible. You're acknowledging that there are times where it's the most effective. But I only say that because there are sometimes
Mm.
people that
Mm.
can have a positive experience with a particular
Mm.
modality, and they say, right, this is this. That's
Mm.
the way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like I had a beautiful teaching from one of my early teachers, a wonderful guy who's since passed, Robert Davison. And he said, guys, what you're doing here is appropriopathy.
Mm,
We're kind of like, what the? He had a interesting way of twisting words. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, you give people the appropriate response that they need for their health.
mm,
Somebody breaks a leg, they need first aid, they need to be brought into a hospital.
mm,
Somebody's had an accident, they need intensive care. You know, my mum, a few years ago had 2 hips done. I was so pleased that surgery was able to be used and morphine was able to be used. So
mm.
homeopathy, you provide the support, and it's one of the dreams, if I were to kind of dream in my ideal health system, it would be one that would have all of the modalities.
Yeah.
Homeopathy obviously would be there, but so would Chinese medicine, so would
Mhm.
traditional herbalism, so would appropriate use of conventional medical drugs. Unfortunately, we're living in a culture where the only real acceptable version of medicine is one that's pharma led. That's
Yeah.
drug companies running the health systems in all the different countries. So it's hard to see. I've done a series of lectures down in the University College in Cork, and each time I went down, there was a different lecture hall, and each of the lecture halls had a plaque on the outside of it, sponsored by, and then it'd be Merck,
Yeah.
Sharp and Dome, GlaxoSmithKline, all these different drug companies. So the drug companies were literally paying for the medical education. So it's a system that has
Yeah.
been designed to sell drugs. So I've absolutely nothing against people providing the appropriate form of medicine. But if medicine is reduced to selling drugs, which it very often is, then patients
Big issue.
suffer.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
Patients suffer in a big way with it. And
Hmm.
to be honest, most of the patients who come to me will have come as having been through the medical system. And look, if the medical system did what it's supposed to be doing, I wouldn't be in business. You know, people come to me because they've been failed by a system that tries to do everything instead of doing what it does really, really well, providing trauma care, providing support for people with operations and this kind of work. You know, instead of just putting that focus, it's like it tries to be everything to everybody. And well, most of my patients, as I said, are rejects from the conventional system. Patients with cancer who've been told to go home and die, people with chronic conditions who are told, oh, you just have to live with it. That's how it is going to be for the rest of your life. People with mental, emotional problems who are put on medication that's leaving them more distressed, more anxious, more depressed than ever, you know, and that's sad. You know, it's a sad state of affairs that we have. And unfortunately, there isn't a great awareness, and I'm delighted we have an opportunity here today to talk about homeopathy because, you know, an awful lot of the comments that I hear from my medical colleagues, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have a lot of colleagues who I have close connections with, but a lot of the comments that I hear from them are simple ignorance, you know, ignorance of not knowing, not stupid ignorance, but simply they'd no idea. They'd never been exposed to it. They'd no idea that homeopathy could turn a child having this massive delirium state into this quiet state. Even Panadol would take time to work, you know, that kind of quality of response people are not aware of, you know. And so a big part of my secret joy with homeopathy is confounding medics. You know, letting medics see what homeopathy can do. And I do, one of my hobbies is working at music festivals, and I've been part of an organization that we set up 3 years ago called PSY Care Ireland, where we go along to festivals and where people get into challenging states of mind. And, you know, some because of the intensity of the environment, some because of the substances or alcohol that they may have taken, and providing a safe space to hold people in this. And sometimes people are really, really, really distressed. And to watch my colleagues who are tempted to go and reach for their Xanax or reach for their antipsychotic drugs, and I said, well, let's just hold off for a moment. Let's try, just watch this, and to see the results and to see their eyes just popping out of their head. I can recall one of my colleagues, you know, we were working at a festival in Portugal, and she was a newly trained doctor, and she was dealing with two women who were having these really intense panic attacks. And he said, oh, can you do something? Because she was being really overwhelmed, because the women thought, as people do when they're having a panic, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. You know, it was like this intensity. And, you know, so she managed to calm one of the women down, but the other was really, had gone off on one. So she asked me to give her a remedy, and I gave a remedy. And by the time the remedy had started to dissolve on this woman's tongue, she just took one deep breath, one big exhale, and smiled and said, thank you, that was great. And my friend's jaw almost hit the ground.
Wow.
You know, this is not supposed to happen. But everything I was trained told me homeopathy is placebo. That must be placebo, is it? And I said, well, how long have I been with this particular patient? She said, at that time, when you gave the remedy, maybe 30 seconds, you know, and placebo. And she just, everything that she had trained told her this was complete placebo. It was, if it did anything, it was just placebo. And she saw something, a kind of reaction that she had never seen. And she had done her internship in psych wards and she'd never seen it. So it's a joy for me to be able to confound doctors in this kind of way and introduce them to, there's another way of doing things, a gentler way of doing things, a way that's very effective, that doesn't have the side effects that the medications that you normally prescribe have. And I also work from a place that if I'm giving a gentler way of doing this, and if I can't calm it down, I'm delighted you've got Xanax in your bag and delighted you've got antipsychotic drugs if somebody's having a really extreme state. And that's the ideal kind of medicine as far as I'm concerned, in appropriopathy, situations where people get the form of medicine that's appropriate for them at the time.
Absolutely, Declan. And it like you mentioned when you started to talk about the empowering feeling you felt when you were raising your kids, that you didn't have to go to the doctors that much, not because you didn't like the doctors, just because you had the capacity to help
Sure.
people with the tools and with the
Uh-huh.
modality that you're talking about. And I
Yeah.
know that there's a lot of families that are having really poor experiences
Mm.
with the health service, with long waiting lists, with
Sure.
a lot of the issues that you can help with homeopathy can help with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I really want that to come
Yeah.
through with this podcast. The other
Yeah.
thing that you mentioned that I really liked, and I thought might be a nice segue into how homeopathy is different,
Mm.
is you mentioned how your capacity um to hold people has improved, has expanded, and as a result, you see the impact with
Mm.
your I don't know if you call them patients, but patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think that's a nice way to start. That in homeopathy, there's a real consideration for the emotional safety of
Mm.
the person that you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
And there's a real knowledge that that
Mm.
in itself has a
Mm.
lot to do with what's going on in the person's health.
Absolutely. And, it's one of the basic principles of homeopathy that everyone does illness differently. So during COVID time, I treated hundreds and hundreds of patients during that time. But there were hardly two patients who had exactly the same symptoms. So they had different remedies. So you treat it individually. Conventional medicine looks, what disease does the person have, and then they get the medicine for that disease. The homeopath looks at the person, sees, okay, they may have this particular disease, but how does that manifest in their experience? And then we match the remedies that suit their individual experience of it. So you can have a dozen patients with COVID or a dozen patients with flu and needing maybe a dozen different remedies. And that's challenging if you're brought up with one size fits all, as is typical with the medicine situation, and it's part of the training with homeopathy to be able to identify what is it that's individual about this person, and we look at the individuality of the disease. How does the disease manifest? There may be a dry cough, it may be, aches and pains, but what effect does it have on the mind? What effect does it have on the emotions? Some people got very, very anxious with COVID. Some people became very depressed with it. Some people, you know, just became completely exhausted and wasted with energy went. So they all had the same disease, but each of them manifested in different ways. So we look at what kind of changes has the person had from their normal state? What's different now? And that's what we're prescribing on. We're prescribing remedies that match that state of imbalance. And that's the training. And it's a 4-year training. It's not a casual kind of a training. To prescribe homeopathy at the kind of level we're talking about and the level that, we've trained people to in the Irish School of Homeopathy, is that it takes 4 years to train. But I within a matter of a few months of reading books, I was able to deal with an awful lot of what happened with my children. This Irish School of Homeopathy and lots of different online courses, they provide homeopathy in the home courses. And with a kit that you can buy from the health food stores or buy online, that you can use to treat your families, a few basic books, 3 or 4 weekends training, you can equip yourself to deal with probably 80% of the things that your family might need. And that is such an empowering thing. You use that word, and that's a cornerstone of homeopathy for me. It's about empowering your patients. It's like, not trust me, I'm a homeopath. I trust my patient. I work from a place that my patient knows what's best for them. So my job is to help them find that out, to tap into that wisdom, tap into that knowledge. In a word, empowerment. And that's why I still do what I do and why I still teach. I travel a lot and I teach webinars. I, travel to different countries doing postgraduate training because it empowers people. And to see people who are empowered to take care of their health, you know, we have a culture of experts. We have to, trust somebody, trust me, I'm a doctor, trust me, I'm a homeopath. Like, why should I? Why should I? I'm asking you to trust yourself, and I'm asking you to get whatever you need to train yourself in this, to empower yourself with this, to get the knowledge. So a lot of what I used to do, and why I was so involved with the school for such a long time, really training people. Like most of the students come to the school because their parents. I warn people who come to introductory courses with homeopathy to be really careful, because it's an addictive practice. People, they learn to realize, oh my God, I can do this and I can do that. And almost every single one of the students who sign up for 4-year training in the Irish School of Homeopathy are people who are parents, and they've realized that they've been able to do some things and they just want to know more. If I can do this and it can benefit this, then what else can I do? And that's for the 4-year journey. And of course, the journey continues. Like, if my journey is whatever, 40 odd years on, I'm still learning and still deepening and still, managing to support people. And it's just a great practice, and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to do. And like, going back to the Indian thing, it's also a cheap form of medicine.
Yeah.
Homeopathy is not expensive. I have a couple of patients at the moment whose bill to the HSE is over 500,000 a year. That's the
Whoa.
Irish Health Service. 500,000 a year. I've patients with cancer whose drug bills are over 100,000 euros a year. It's very expensive. This is a big, big business. Homeopathy is a relatively cheap form of medicine.
Mm.
And that, in these times, like especially in places like America and other parts of the world where people are becoming bankrupted because of their
Mm.
medical bills, that you can have a form of medicine that you can get very cheaply, that you can access very cheaply, and treat people very cheaply, with like up to a particular level, with some very basic skills that you can learn. And I love that. I love the possibility, and I love the freedom that gives, and I love the possibilities that it brings in. And back to that, the E word, empowerment. It's really an empowering way of being in the world. And it
Totally.
just helps people. There's so much suffering. You just turn on the news and it's just suffering all around. To be able to provide some level of support for people suffering at a time when there's just suffering everywhere, for me,
Mm.
that's a beautiful calling.
Totally. I, one kind of aspect of homeopathy that I think is um, particularly countercultural is that it kind of sets off a curiosity within what's going on with me, and because, like you said, there's a lot of medicine that we have, and it's like, right, we'll treat that symptom, we'll numb that symptom, and then you'll feel better.
Mm.
But it can start off like, oh, okay. And I'll just, from my experience with the homeopath that I've come across, they also ask you questions that you've probably never been asked before,
Mhm.
which those things just set off questions. You're like, wait,
That's
wait, what's going on with my brother? Has something to do with
mhm.
what I'm feeling now, or
Right.
what happened in childhood has something, and it's this kind of beautiful, like,
Mhm.
little gentle push, like, hey, you can look at this as well. And there's like this line between, people might say, oh, well, then you're putting it on me, putting, well, like, how I'm sick is because of my fault, because of my situation, but it's also this potential to go, oh, I didn't even realize
That's
that the fact that I'm
mm.
so angry at work every day might have something to do with,
Mm.
insert the symptoms.
Sure.
And I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it too. And it's not just family stuff, it can be even ancestral stuff. A lot of conditions, particularly people in really distressed mental and emotional states, very often it's trauma. It's trauma that's been passed down the line. Listening to the news this evening, listening to a woman who's spent for the last 40 years fighting for the rights of folks who've lived in the institutions in Ireland. Her mother was put into an institution when she was a baby, had, locked up in a church institution, had 3 children, was raped in it, and then listening to this woman who's like 80 years on from her mother's experience, is reliving these experiences of her mum. And this is something like, when you really drop into a person's experience, like, the roots of her illness can go very deep and go back into the past. And for me, this is a wonderful, wonderful skill that we can be able to support ancestral healing. We all have, you know, we can all draw on experiences that we've had that have been difficult in family situations, and we can help rewrite those stories. And it's one of the beautiful things for homeopathy for me, that we can actually help people heal broken family lines and help people. Ultimately, it's medicine that helps people to come back to themselves, you know. And I really like to hear what you said there, because it, for me, good homeopathy, and to be fair, there are people out there who are messers, people who are dabbling, and it's really important if you're going to, and it's something that we will need to talk about, if you're going to, yeah, go looking for homeopathy, then make sure that you go to the right places and make sure that you get somebody who's been trained. In Ireland, we have a professional body called the Irish Society of Homeopaths. Every country that I'm aware of has a national body, and there'll be a register of people who've gone through proper training, who are insured, who you can be absolute sure that they have the basic training. And working with somebody who is properly trained, homeopathy can bring you to a place of choice. You know, we are limited by our illnesses, we're limited by our pain, our emotional pain, physical pain. Homeopathy can bring you to a place where you're no longer limited by that, and where you now have a choice to make changes in your life. People will say, "Oh, well, I'll take this remedy and it'll change my life." No, it's a catalyst for you changing your life. You change your life by changing it. You know, you make the changes. But the homeopathy can help bring you to a place where you're actually better able to make changes, where you're no longer limited by your illness, and then you can make changes to move into choosing healthier ways of being in the world. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important. A lot of people come to me with an illness they want to get rid of. And for me, the way I like to work, if I only help somebody get rid of their illness, whatever it's a physical or emotional, mental, or whatever it is, if I only do that and nothing has changed in their lives, personally, I feel very disappointed.
Wow.
You know, so for me, it's not just about helping people move on from illness. It's about helping people move towards greater health,
Mm.
greater aliveness, greater connection with themselves. Healing, in my case, is not just for me personally. You know, if I'm doing on a healing journey in myself, I'm more loving to myself. I'm more loving to my partner, to my kids, to my grandkids. So
Mm.
healing spreads. So this is something that's really, really important for me. If
Mm.
I don't see this happening, then I really want to continue to work with my patients to be able to support them, to create and make choices in their life that are healthier ones. So it's not
Mm.
about getting rid of illness, it's about creating health and promoting health, supporting people becoming healthier and more alive. And you touched on it earlier, like health for a homeopath is not just physical health and not just being, not being limited by pain. You know, it's about emotional health, it's about social health, it's about mental health, and dare I say, spiritual health. You know, that
Mhm.
you have a sense, and what I mean by that is not about a belief in a God, but a sense of purpose, that it
Mm.
supports you having a purpose in your life. That's for me is real healing. That when people come and they got lost because of trauma, and they got lost because of their conditions, and it brought them back to themselves and helped them find themselves and find a purpose in their life. That's real healing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And that's for me one of the great gifts that homeopathy can bring. It's, and I call what I do on my website, it's soul medicine, because it speaks to the soul. It helps people come back to themselves, to find
Mm.
themselves. It helps people find their way. You know, so many of us have lost our way because
Yeah.
of all sorts of different things: trauma, disease, circumstances. Yeah, you know, it helps
Mm.
people to come back to themselves, and it just feels like a really, really important thing to do these days. And thank God we have a tool in homeopathy to be able to do that, to
Totally.
support people coming back, and to do it in a gentle way.
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of different medical modalities that you can create catharsis, and you can create a lot of drama. Homeopathy is a gentle way of working. We
Mm.
work basics of a minimum intervention. You want the minimum dose that will help to catalyze a healing shift inside you. So it's a very gentle way of working, but it's a
Mm.
very consistent, supportive way of working to help you gently move through your challenges into a more expansive, more healthy life, you know?
I want to get into a kind of a practical example just in a sec, but I felt the need to say that the previous conversation we recorded for the podcast is with a guy called Martin Prechtel, and he said something that's kind of ringing with me now. Is that he says a lot of people are looking for um, the Jesus splitting the sea moment to believe again, to believe in something a bit that feels magical, that feels like, oh my God, like life is wild. I can't even put a limit on life.
Mm.
And he says, but the miracle's everywhere.
Right.
And what rings true is that like homeopathy is this kind of invitation to actually you experience that miracle, right? Because if you notice that, oh, there is a bit of a reduction and I do feel a bit better and I
Mm.
feel like I am connected with my partner a bit more or with my job a bit more or
Yes.
these things, it, like you said, it sets this roll off and people all of a sudden do have this greater sense
Mm.
of a belief
Mm.
in things changing,
Sure. Yeah.
in things that they used to not think that could be true are true.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and it's like it's moving. I love Martin's work. You know, he's
Oh,
got so much to offer, and
yeah,
we're so hooked on the idea of a magic bullet.
yeah,
Jesus will come down from the mountain and heal us. You know, like we will take this magic drug and everything will go away. It's magical thinking. You know, getting sick on whatever level we're talking about is not something that's happened overnight. When I work with people who have illnesses like cancer or that, you know, I'm hearing that their illness, their out of balance state didn't start the day they were diagnosed with
no,
whatever disease they have. You know, and we spend a lot of time, you alluded to it that earlier, you know, we spend a lot of time with our patients, you know. I have a number of local general practitioners who come to me as patients, and many of them spend 3 or 4 minutes with the new patient. You know, if a new patient comes to me, I'd spend 45 minutes, an hour with them. I get a really deep understanding of their history and what's going on with them and everything else. And we see that them getting ill is a process. And helping them get well is also a process. It's a journey they'll make with it. Then, you know, people call me every other day and said, "Oh, I believe you have the cure for this." And I have to respond and say, "I've never cured anybody." You know, for me, all healing is self healing. Homeopathy is a catalyst for self healing. It helps people support it, stimulates the vitality. You know, we have the ability to heal ourselves. You break a bone, you cut yourself. You know, the body heals itself. It's how we're designed. You know, sometimes that process gets blocked, and that's where things like homeopathy can come in. It's a catalyst for healing, you know, and that's a process. So getting people to understand this, it took them a long time to get sick, and then the change is not something that's going to happen overnight. So that's part of the education, and that's part of the empowerment as well. Realizing actually choices I made for whatever reason got me sick. New choices I'm making are actually choices that are bringing me towards wellness and that. And that's where the empowerment comes in. There's no great empowerment. If, God forbid I had the ability to take a wand and tap you on the head and just heal you. You know, how empowering is that? You might get down on your knees and say, "Oh, thank you, Declan, that's great," you know, but how empowering is it? And, you know, but when you've journeyed and you've gone deep into yourself and you've healed broken parts of yourself, that is intensely empowering. That changes lives. And I'm seeing it happening every day. People's lives changing when they change their lives. And the work that I do, the space that I hold for people, and the remedies that I use, all of these are catalysts for it, for patients healing themselves, you know, and supporting them in their own healing. So yeah, absolutely. I love what Martine is saying there. Like we're looking for this, but that's part of our culture, you know.
mm,
Which is, oh, it's like the magical quality of it, and like it's a kind of a myth that conventional medicine works a lot with. You know, I constantly hear about some new amazing drug that's coming on, and I hear this term magic bullet. I've been hearing it for as long as I've been doing this work. A magic bullet, like, um, no. sometimes healing can seem like magic, but it's not something that has just happened with the taking of a medicine or Jesus parting the waters. It's as a result of the work you've done. And
Mm,
that gentle kind of miraculousness that I love, and that's a really empowering quite. It's an everyday miracle. When I can be more loving with my kids and my grandkids, that's quite
mm,
miraculous. And I'm
mm.
really pleased to have that kind of quality. But that didn't happen overnight. I'm bloody working at this.
That's great. Um, so I was thinking that it might be good for listeners to hear maybe a more quote unquote everyday example, and then maybe an example more extreme. Where I know you say you're working with people who have
Hmm,
cancer. Um, just so like for people who have a vague idea of what to expect or what happens,
hmm,
and what homeopathy can assist with.
hmm,
For things that are quite common, say like irritable bowel
hmm,
syndrome, or kind of
hmm,
endometriosis, or these
hmm,
things that um, real stomach issues, digestive issues, these things, and people they go to the doctor and they get something, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and they kind of just accept. All right, well, this has just happened. Could you maybe explain potentially how homeopathy could help with these kind of
hmm.
symptoms?
God, it's, you know, if you take an A to Z of diseases, disease conditions, mental and emotional disorders, you could latch homeopathy onto every single one of them.
Wow.
I got involved with homeopathy because of my daughter having a fever, so from children having colds, fevers. I had just before I came on to you, I had a new patient who came. She's 11 years old. She's suffering hugely from anxiety. Um, and it turned out that 2 years ago, she was on holidays, had a really horrible stomach bug, and now she's developed a phobia for throwing up, and a phobia for eating, and a phobia for, getting sick. And she's had this, and it's how things work. The more she's anxious, the more pain she has in her tummy, the more pain she has in her tummy, the greater anxiety that comes. So she's now developed a sensitivity. So she can't have any gluten. She can't have any dairy. Her stomach is really sensitive to a huge range of different conditions, different foods, different environments. She's become hypersensitive. So we provided a remedy for her, a remedy called phosphorus that actually supports deep levels of anxiety, and it supports people who have very little sense of boundaries, and where they get very impacted by what's going on around them and get very concerned and worried about other people. So she feels other people's pain. So, when supporting her healing her belly, now I've just started working with her today, but I've worked with her brother, and her brother came through similar kind of issues after having a huge shock. He saw one of his best friends having a serious accident. He's now 10 years old, and his friend almost died. So he was having nightmares, and he saw, in his nightmares, that God was going to take him, the devil was going to take him, and he was terrified to go to sleep. So we helped him to sleep, we helped him to calm, we helped him to release all of those anxieties. So I expect to be able to do the same with the sister. So really, it doesn't matter whether the presentation is of an emotional level or a physical level. You're looking at the outer balance state. So, people will often come to homeopathy through the everyday kind of illnesses, the kind of things that we plague our doctors with, colds, flus, the kind of things that we can, they're very practical things that we can do. And with a handful of homeopathic remedies, and I mean literally a handful, 6 or 7 homeopathic remedies, you can deal with quite a number of the different conditions. So a lot of those kind of acute conditions. The big work that most professional homeopaths find themselves with is in the area of chronic conditions, because that's, with all respect to what conventional medicine has to offer, chronic conditions are really like things like arthritis, things like what you mentioned, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, this kind of thing. The medicines that are prescribed are really to control symptoms. they're not, it's expected that if you have a chronic condition, basically take this drug for the rest of your life. Same thing if you have depression. Same thing if you've had some really challenged mental states, schizophrenia, psychotic outbreaks, these kind of things. You're on medicine potentially for the rest of your life, and you can support people to come through their experiences, to help them come back to balance, to come back to themselves, and in many cases, helping people, supporting them to come off medications that have been a vicious circle of keeping them sick. So, it's like I could give hundreds of examples of all different kind of things, and it's literally the A to the Z of every illness. And as I said, the majority of homeopathic practice these days is around the chronic disease. People, we don't specialize per se as homeopaths because we're open to it. So I think most homeopathic practices would be similar to a GP practice in that they get a range of different things coming to them. Because of our personal experience, I have a lot of experience working with people with really deep and challenged mental states, and people have often come off this psychiatric system and that. So I do a lot of my work with that. I've developed some skills with it. But I have women colleagues who have a huge affinity for pregnancy and childbirth and have supported, women going through pregnancy, if they're anyway concerned about doing it in a good way, are going to avoid chemical medication because obviously it'll go through to the children, to the baby that they're carrying. So, there are homeopaths who really do wonderful work with pregnancy and childbirth. For years, my previous partner was a midwife, and we did home births, and we provided care and support for women through labour and after birth and postnatal. A huge amount of women have problems afterwards because of care or lack of care that they've received, and postnatal depression is a huge thing for mothers and fathers, by the way. 1 in 10 fathers suffer massively with postnatal depression. And the remedies can be incredibly useful in these situations as well. So, different homeopaths will have an affinity because of their own personal experience of working with it. I, obviously being a guy, I have an affinity for working with men and men through challenges. And so it's a huge range to be able to say this is what homeopathy, like what can homeopathy not do, would be a much better question to ask. And, sometimes homeopathy, you need stronger drugs. I've worked for some years, worked with a wonderful consultant psychiatrist, a guy called Dr. Michael Curry. And Michael was a very, very unusual psychiatrist in that he never gave an antidepressant. He didn't believe that depression was a disease. He said it was a reaction. It was an emotional response to circumstances, and he never gave an antidepressant. And we worked with hundreds of patients together. And he sent me sometimes patients who were really manic. And I remember one patient, she hadn't slept in 10 days and she was wired to the moon. And, she presented in a way that I thought recognized a particular remedy, that this was good for her state. It lasted about 5 minutes. She calmed down and then she was up again. I repeated and she calmed down. And it was like, you need to go back to Michael Curry and get some benzodiazepines and get a good night's sleep and then come back to me. So I've realized also the limitations that homeopathy has. Sometimes, a gentle approach doesn't do it. Sometimes you need a hammer, and in this case and in many other cases, people actually need it. What the pharma drugs could do, like benzodiazepines used appropriately can be amazing. Unfortunately, they're not always used appropriately. They're often given out like candies. People get addicted to them and then have huge problems coming off them.
Thanks for that, Declan.
Long-winded, and sorry, I can't give you a list of an A to Z because it does literally cover everything with it. It's like there's, no matter what somebody rings up with, there's always something I find I can do. And I have people who ring up to me, and I alluded to it at the beginning. People in Ireland, homeopathy is really only been available to the masses since the early 90s. And So for an awful lot of people, it's still something that they only do after they've done everything else. So we're really at the bottom of the barrel in many cases. So people will have tried it. So often people come to me literally when they're dying, and I'm asked, basically, can you save this person? And of course, I can't play God, but there's always something I can do. And some of the most beautiful work that I've done, apart from working in a home birth situation, is supporting people in the dying process, that they can actually die in a peaceful way, relatively pain free, and helping them to stay very quiet in themselves and to go deeper into themselves as they passed. And yeah, it's like you can always do something with homeopathy. It's a very, very rare person who has come to me that I haven't been able to help on some level.
Mm,
I managed to cure everything that everyone comes with. No,
mm,
and to, to actually say otherwise would just be really misrepresenting it. It's like, because we're not dealing with magic here. We're dealing with a modality of medicine, and we're actually dealing with people's lives. And
mm,
sometimes people's lives are what's making them sick. Their lifestyle, doing what they're doing. I'm remembering one particular patient. He was a film director, and he came to me with a very, very serious bleeding stomach ulcer. And his daily diet involved massive amounts of spices, a bottle of whiskey, and between 5 and 8 grams of cocaine every day. And sometimes when he was on set, he wouldn't sleep for 4 or 5 days. And he had a stomach ulcer, and he suffered from anxiety and stress. Now, yes, I can give a remedy and support him, but unless you change your lifestyle, unless you do something. And this is the conversation that you'll have with your homeopaths, and hopefully the consultation that you have will give you a deeper insight into the lifestyle that you're leading, how that may be impacting your health and you're inhibiting your well-being, and that you now have choices. You can continue doing that. And the guy also drank. I said, what about coffee? And he said, yeah, I like espressos. He'd make a flask of 1.5 liters of espressos, and he'd chain drank them through the day. And he said, I suppose you're going to tell me now that I can't drink coffee or do any of these things. I said, well, what do you feel? How do you, when you listen to yourself describing all of these substances that you're putting into your body and treating yourself in that way, what do you think? He said, he used some very choice language and a lot of words beginning with F. And he said, it's effing stupid, isn't it? And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? I'll F and stop it. He literally, from one end of the month to the other, he went cold turkey on all of the different substances that he'd been putting into his body. And he healed very fast. He healed because he realized in the conversation that he was actually making himself sick.
mm. Declan, to touch on your work with people with very um with conditions that they're so long in the teeth, like they're so close that you can't quote unquote bring them back to full health, and you work with the dying process. I was actually going to ask you about this, but it came up naturally where I remember in Gabor Mate's new book, The Myth of Normal, he talks about and he references countless cases of people who have received a pretty serious diagnosis and decided to kind of look inwards and go, all right, what's going on? What did I do? Is this connected to this? Disconnected to that? And he he kind of made this beautiful point that not all of them um were cured, as he would say. Not all of them went into full remission per se, but he said so many of them did heal, which is like so many of them came to a point of like beautiful acceptance of themselves, or like a connection with themselves that they'd never felt for their entire lives.
Beautiful,
And I
yeah.
know it sounds wild, but many people even say, I'm really grateful I got this
Mm,
because it gave me something that I've never gotten before. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with this. And, I love Gabor Mate's work. And we have a bit of an echo on the line here. Yeah. And I have a patient I've been working with for the last six months. She's had a double mastectomy, and she's had stage 4 breast cancer, and it's come back after the double mastectomy. And we've been journeying together over 6 months. And she said, it was the greatest gift that she ever had, getting cancer. It brought her the healing that she's had. And these are her words. She said, the healing that I've experienced in the last 6 months. She was terrified of dying. She was terrified of the cancer spreading. And she said, the cancer has given me gifts that I couldn't have dreamt about. I've done healing for myself and my family that I couldn't have dreamt about. And I said, what about death? And she said, well, when death comes, death comes. Now that's healing, Jim. It's moving us away from, can you cure my cancer? Can you get rid of it? That's magical thinking. She was focusing on the healing, and she has done. And as a sideline, her cancer has gone into remission. But I had to ask about that. She didn't even see fit to tell me about that. In the last 2 sessions, I had to say, well, how had the recent scans been? Oh, yeah, they're better. She was so focused and so amazed at the healing that she had done for herself. Now, that's the gift. And I hear this very, very often from people who've had illness. I've had people say, thank God they got cancer, so many times over the years. And I've heard it hundreds and hundreds of times. And it still gives me a kind of like, oof, it's hard to hear. I know where they're coming from, but it's hard to hear. And it's hard to hear that in the culture we're in, people get so far out of their normal life, out of their balance, that it's taken a chronic disease to bring them back to themselves. But that's what illness can provide. It's like, rather than thinking about illness as this terrible thing you have to get rid of, working with it. The word homeopathy, it's Greek. It's similar suffering. It's that you work with the illness. And that's a fundamental difference with homeopathy and conventional medicine. Conventional medicine, it's the language of warfare. We use painkillers. We use antibiotics. We go in, with big guns. It's the language of war. We're fighting against illness. Homeopathy works with the imbalance to help to bring things into alignment. And for me, it's a far more sensible way of working, and that's where people like this lady can say, well, thank God they got it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that the Krishnamurti quote of it is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society,
Mm,
and that it's so easy for many people, for us, to fall into, well, like I'm working a job and I'm making a good wage and I am providing for my family. I'm doing these things that are expected of me, um, but
mm,
it means that I travel an hour to work and an hour back, and I don't really get to spend time in nature, and I don't really get to spend time with my extended family. And it's almost that, unfortunately, we're slowly getting to this point where we're realizing that it's very hard to live how we're encouraged to live
mm.
and also feel very connected and healthy, and I'd
Absolutely.
say that's a very difficult part of the work as well.
Mm. Sure, and that's where illness comes in. You know, it's like, I often use the kind of analogy that, it's like a light coming on. You're driving your car, and the red light comes on. Indicating you need to put oil in or attend to something. And you can do, like, the conventional approach would be to, I'll get rid of the bulb. I'll change the bulb. You know, Whereas the homeopathy, as we talked about at the beginning, it's like, well, I need to lift up the bonnet and to see what's out of balance. And illness is a sign that things are out of balance. It's a sign that I'm living my life in a way that's not in tune with my higher purpose, and it's not, a way that's serving me and my family, and not serving my community. And like, where do we stop? It's not serving the planet. Living in this kind of way, making ourselves sick, you know, and we have the micro and the macro on this. Look at the planet. Look at what we've done to the planet. It's like there's a sickness at foot here. You know, all the news is full of war, fighting against. And, we need another form of healing that's not built on fighting against. We see what happens on a personal level, treating illnesses with drugs that make us even sicker. When you see the same kind of mentality when you have people across a border, or you feel that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, and you invade them. It's the same mentality. It's the mentality that's killing us as individuals. Is killing whole cultures. It's destroying tens of thousands of people in Gaza as we speak. It's destroying the planet. We need a different mindset here, and homeopathy provides not just a tool for individual healing, but it provides a model for addressing what's out of balance in ourselves, in our communities, and in nature. And homeopathy is not only used for treating human beings. I have colleagues who are treating their plants with homeopathy. I have colleagues who are vets. There are a number of wonderful vets here in Ireland and the UK who are treating small and large animals, and doing amazing, amazing work, which kind of, I always smile when people say, oh, well, using homeopathy, there's nothing in these remedies, so it must be a placebo. Does that work for a cow? Does that work for this plant here beside me? We're working with the energy, and they're tools for healing, and we can use these tools in all sorts of different ways. And we're starting to understand this more and more. Like, in the history, homeopathy as we know it is only just over 200 years old. Its roots go back thousands of years. It's the kind of principles have been known for thousands of years, but it's just been in the form that we use it now. It's only a couple of 100 years old. And the earlier homeopaths, they didn't talk about treating animals. They didn't talk about treating plants. Our colleagues all over the world are realizing the potential of healing that's in the homeopathic remedies is much faster than just treating individual human beings. We can help heal sick lands, help to heal sick plants, help to heal sick animals, as well as all the two-leggeds that need our support.
That's amazing, Declan. I hadn't heard that at all, because I'm sure you've heard of this, and I've heard this as well, that somebody's neighbor's cat is on antidepressants, or somebody's dog is on antidepressants, and whenever I heard that, I got profoundly sad. But I also would say, well, what else can we do? And I didn't know that you could prescribe it for animals. That's amazing.
There are homeopathic vets in probably every country that people are listening from,
Wow.
and they're doing amazing work. And often, like with humans, people bring their animals to these vets when they've done everything else. Like, I hope that through broadcasts like this, and more and more familiarity with homeopathy, people would choose homeopathy as a gentle step for the first step. It's sad for me when people choose homeopathy as a last resort, when they've been made sick and brought to the point of death, whether it's two-legged or four-legged patients. And the more we become aware of it, let's use a gentler approach first. And if the gentle approach doesn't do what you need, we know that there are strong chemicals that are out there that can be used as medicine. But I'm very fond of the idea that we're using a minimum dose here. We're using a gentle form of medicine that has a profound ability to support people's healing.
Totally, Declan. And just as we're moving to a close, I just wanted to ask about misconceptions about homeopathy. Um, is there a few that you would like to just knock out of the park, just in
Oh,
case people think, oh, well, I heard that it's like this?
Google homeopathy, and the top 50 hits are all about homeopathy fake medicine. And among those are, there's nothing in it, it can't work. And it's based, these kind of ideas are based on the idea that medicine needs chemicals in it to work. Homeopathy doesn't work on the level of chemistry. You can't use conventional ideas of what science is to judge homeopathy. and that it's been debunked, dismissed, found fraudulent, all sorts of stuff because it doesn't fit the medical model. Of course, it doesn't fit the medical model. It's a science of energy. It's not a chemical science. It doesn't fit the models of biochemistry. So I'm interested in why it works. Or rather, I'm interested in it working. Just before we came on air, we were talking about, like, why does it work? I've got lights here in front of me that I've turned on by flicking a switch. I don't need to know the science of electricity to be able to work with it. Homeopathy is something that has provided healing for millions and millions of people. The last count, there are 200 million people in India use homeopathy as their primary source of medicine. There are over 400 to 500 million people in the world at the moment currently using homeopathy. 45% of French GPs prescribe homeopathy. Doctors in Germany, pharmacists in Germany have to learn how to be able to use homeopathic remedies. Every pharmacist in Germany has to be trained to do it, to use this. I'm interested in, why do people use it? People use it because it works. I have no interest in the science of it, and I have colleagues who've devoted themselves to doing clinical research, to doing all sorts of different research. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a practitioner. I want to see people heal, so I use the tool. So, my advice to people is, try it. It's Don't be too worried about why it works. Focus on, if you feel the call to try something gentler, if you feel the call to, you're not getting the benefit that you expect to get from your regular medical treatment, give it a try. The vast majority of the teachers down the years from the very beginning with homeopathy are people who are totally skeptical. People like my medical colleague who said, this can't work, it shouldn't work, it defies all the laws of science, but yet it does. Give it a try. And that's what this is all about for me. It's about, not why does something work, it's about it working and it being an effective and gentle tool for healing that has stood the test of time. We're using remedies, and we're using ways of working with medicine that have been developed over the last 200 years. I've been doing it for 40 odd years, and there've been so many new drugs have come on the market because the previous generation people have suffered so many problems, side effects from them. Homeopathy has built on 200 years of consistent use through cholera epidemics, through typhoid epidemics, through COVID epidemics. It stood the test of time. It's been criticized from the very beginning, and it continues to be criticized because it doesn't fit the medical model, but it works.
So I love this because it reminds me of maybe a year or two ago we interviewed an acupuncturist, and he made a similar thing where he says, I have people who come in and they've no interest on how acupuncture works, what exactly I'm doing, but they come back because it helps. They come back because it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's why people come, because it works. If it didn't, I wouldn't be in business. It's provided me a very nice lifestyle. I'm doing a job that helps people heal and has given me a really good life. If it was bogus, if it was what all of the various different websites are suggesting, I wouldn't be able to do this work. But just as a side note, if anyone is really interested in these various different people who are dismissing homeopathy as bogus, look into their background. There's some very interesting organizations behind getting homeopathy down on the list, and organizations that have been, there's a one in England working, Sense for Science, a wonderful periodical in the UK called What Doctors Don't Tell You, a magazine that looks at all the research. That they researched this particular organization that have been dismissive of homeopathy in the media and online for the last 20 years. There's 15 different pharma companies behind this organization. So I'm kind of interested in a very kind of dark way about who's behind this negativity about it, because I see it work every day. I have students who ask me, well, when did I start believing in homeopathy? I don't believe in homeopathy. I've never believed in homeopathy. I've seen it work every single day of my life since late 1979. You know, it works. I see it working. That's what it's about. It's not a belief system.
It's beautiful, Declan. I don't think there's a better place to end it, except for the last question that I ask guests, which is, what lesson is life teaching you right now?
This probably sounds like it's coming from an old hippie, but the only thing worth dedicating my life to at this stage is love. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. I'm nearly 69 years old, and everything I do it for love. And that's what my life has brought me to.
Wow, I love that, Declan. Beautiful.
Mm.
Thanks so much for your time. It's been amazing. Really appreciate it. I'm sure listeners are going to come back changed, a little more open, a little more curious.
Mm.
I will leave the link to your website in the show notes for people who want to learn more about your work.
Mm.
And yeah, I just want to thank you again. I really, really do. And maybe we can go for a dip in Greystone sometime.
Great.
Thanks a million, Declan.
You're very welcome, Jim.